Okay, this video is to show you how to make sure that your swivel and all of these pieces are properly installed on your hose reel. If you're having difficulty keeping the swivel on the axle, or if there's not enough room, there is something that is holding the axle or the reel too far out on the axle, and there's only so many things that can cause that to happen. So I'm going to be going through those one at a time, because when you get it properly assembled, you should have at least a 1/2 of an inch of axle showing for the swivel to be clamped onto. Now this is our latest threadless or smooth axle. We also had the axles in the previous generations that had threads on them, and it doesn't matter, the thread should also be showing. You should have at least a 1/2 inch of axle so you can get the these swivels onto that axle, okay? So there should be at least a 1/2 inch of axle showing for the swivel to get attached to. All right, so if you don't have enough space here, I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot that and make sure you do. So the way this works is the swivel is the last thing to go on the axle, and it holds everything on the axle. It holds everything together, okay? So if you don't have enough room, let's back it off and show you. The cam lever brake, one of the biggest culprits, is the cam lever brake is not properly inserted into the slot on the flange. There's a tab on the brake that needs to go in there. If it's not, you can see it's going to cause a problem with enough axle being shown. So that needs to be inserted properly. Also, the step prior to that is the hose strap. The hose strap, it doesn't go in here like this. The strap always goes through the slot in the flange. So the strap itself goes through, and then the metal wedge part slides right inside the concave part of the flange. So it sits in there like that, and then the cam lever brake actually holds it in place. You can see the cam lever brake holds the strap in place, okay? And then again, once you get the swivel on, it holds everything in place. Now, if the cam lever or the hose strap are not the problem, then the only thing left is these white bushings, these Delrin bushings. Now, they need to be flush against the flange. So I'm going to pull this off so you can get a close look here. You can see this edge, there is no gap between the flange and the Delrin bushing. There is no gap there. And there's also one on the front. There's also one on the back side, okay? So you got to check those and make sure that those bushings are fully seated against the flange. Okay, here's an example of a Delrin bushing that is not properly or fully seated into the flange. You can see the little gap where there's the flange on the bushing is not fully seated. There's a little gap right here to where there's space between the flange and the flange on the bushing. So what you need to do is you need to get that pushed back in properly, and it's unlikely you're going to be able to do it with just your hand. So what I would suggest is you pull the reel off, pull the flange assembly off the reel, put down a towel to protect the paint surface on your flange, and when the bushing is already started inside the flange, you might be able to just take a rubber mallet and pound it the rest of the way in. Another way is to take a short 2x4, because you want to go across the bushing. If you just hit one side of the bushing, it's just going to teeter-totter back and forth, and you're going to have a hard time getting it seated properly. But if you take a 2x4, it'll go across the full bushing, give it a good wrap, and now it is properly seated, okay? So now that'll take care of that. Okay, so if the bushing, the Delrin bushing has come completely out of the flange, it's going to be hard to get it started without it kind of teeter-tottering back and forth. And so the best way to do this is to get a 2x4 or something that can stretch across here, across both sides of the delrin bushing, and be able to push it back in together. What I would suggest is you pull the reel off the axle. If the hose is on it, you don't have to take the hose off, but what you're gonna wanna do is set this down, and again, I would put it on a towel or a rug or someplace to protect the painted surface, and then get it set on there so it's kind of square. There is a little taper to this bushing right here. Get that little taper started in the flange so it's kind of square. Then take your 2x4, put it square on top, and just give it a couple good wraps with the rubber mallet, or you could use a claw hammer too if you want. Okay, and just make sure when you're done, the flange on that bushing is seated fully against the surface of the hose reel flange. So if the bushings, both the front and back bushings, are properly seated into the flanges, then the next thing you want to do, is just make sure it is fully pushed onto the axle, okay? So first thing you do, now again, we're showing this on the freestanding hose reel, but this is the exact same setup on every hose reel, whether it be the 2-wheel cart, the 4-wheel cart, the wall unit, the wood post, they all have the same exact setup. The only thing different is going to be the frame out here. The axles are the same and all that. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the reel is fully seated on all the way on the axle, okay? If the bushing is fully seated and is pushed all the way on, then when you turn it around, again, at that time, before you even put everything else on, you should probably have a good inch of axle showing, okay? Now, again, the hose strap, the cam lever brake. Now, the cam lever brake should look like this. The cam lever itself is shaped kind of like a referee whistle, and when it is properly installed, this little tab on the handle should be pointing up. You see this little notch right here? It should be pointing up. This cam lever is capable of getting twisted and turned, and if it does, you'll need to correct it. It can get turned like this, and it won't be able to work properly in this position. If this little tab is pointing down, as you look like this with the hose strap right here, if it's pointing down, you'll need to pull that off, rotate it, and get it into the proper orientation so it's pointing up. That way the cam lever can work properly. This is in the on position where it is applying drag to the brake. What happens is when you turn it on, this pinches the axle and creates some drag as you're pulling the hose out. That drag can be adjusted by tightening or loosening this nut. And it is a 3/8 inch nut. You just loosen it a little bit to cause it to spin more freely, okay? And we have another video that shows how to properly adjust that. And then this is in the off position, and with the cam lever in the off position, the whole reel spins freely, making it real easy to roll back in. Okay, so cam lever brake, delrin bushings, if all those are pushed on properly, you then should have room to put your swivel on the axle, okay? Now, this is the new threadless axle, and so the swivel will go directly on there. And if you're getting this with a new hose reel, you're gonna get this type of wrench, and the 5mm end of that wrench will go through the opening in the flange, and you'll tighten it onto the axle this way right here, okay? So you can just see, you'll rotate that. And again, if you got at least a 1/2 inch of axle, that should clamp down well. Now, if you're having trouble getting this to tighten down onto the axle, make sure that the nut itself, or the screw, is properly oriented. This collar has a recessed end, you can see, and this end is just the threaded end, okay? You don't want it looking like that. This screw, and be careful, there is a little oil on there. This screw should fit inside to where the head fits down into this pocket. So as you tighten it down, it will recess into that pocket. That's the proper orientation for that screw. So if you're trying to tighten it down and it's not tightening down, make sure this screw is in the proper orientation, okay?